All right, good, whatever time it is when you're watching this video. So, today we're going to talk about something that's not taught very, very well in history classes, and it's really important. It is about the Japanese Democide. So, and I should say Democide, not Democide. Anyway, so learning targets are I can understand how the Japanese treated other groups of before and during World War II, and I can compare and contrast the Nazi treatment of Jews to the Japanese treatment of other Asian groups. I can understand how the Asian Holocaust affects world relations in modern society, and I can understand the differences between a Holocaust and a democide. So, why is this all important? A lot of historians and normal people only seem to remember that the Jews went through a Holocaust during World War II. This is not the case at all. There are other groups of people that throughout history that have had Holocausts and genocides and democides. Um, the Holocaust that actually happened is actually a highly debated topic today in 2021. I don't know why it says 2020. Japan has never officially said sorry to countries like China, North and South Korea, and et cetera, for the Holocaust, which caused a lot of anger from many Asian countries. That's still a problem today. There's a lot of women and children that have survived what I'm going to talk about today. It is important to know that genocide and Holocaust happen in other parts of the world to different groups of people. It's not just Jews that are killed for no reason. So please do keep this in mind. So the definition of a democide means it's the deliberate, intentional killing of unarmed or disarmed military members or civilians for no reason. In a democide, the group that is doing the killing does it without trying to cover anything up or hiding the bodies. During the Holocaust, the Nazis killed Jews secretly. People didn't know about it until after the war was over, or towards the end of the war. In Japanese democide, people were killed and people around the world knew about it. That is the difference between the two. Oh, I should really, make this bigger so people can see it. Whoop. Um, so the Japanese democide lasted from 1937 to 1945. That's about 9 years, so almost a decade. There were 6 to 10 million people killed by the Japanese during this time period. Historians cannot actually really pinpoint a real number just because records in Asian countries at the time were not always up to date like in European countries. It also doesn't help that the United States firebombed almost everything in Japan and in Asia, which then burnt up the records. Most victims were Chinese. Other groups of people that were targeted were Koreans, Filipinos, Pacific East Islanders, and countless other groups of people living in Asia. Also captured Allied soldiers were also big targets for the Japanese. So why did the Japanese do this? During the 1800s and the early 1900s, Japan modernized itself. I put that in quotation marks because they really were modernized. They modeled their country after European countries as well as America. The result of this is that they had a good economy and one of the strongest militaries in Asia. But I don't know if you know this, but America and European countries, when they like quote unquote modernized, they took with them a lot of like racism and this uppity attitude that they're better than everybody else, which is still a problem today. After Japan modernized, they looked down on other Asian countries and other Asian groups of people. They saw them as backwards and inferior. After time, Japan believed that all of Asia should be full of Japanese people. This is the main reason why Japan invaded China and the rest of Asia. They felt that their race was better than everybody else's, so that they should be able to conquer the rest of the continent of Asia. So what happened to civilians during the war when the Japanese army would invade an Asian country? They would burn down towns and cities. They would shoot anybody who was running away. It did not matter if they were civilian or not either. Japanese soldiers would play games with each other as well. For example, when China was invaded, soldiers pulled out swords and started stabbing civilians. Whoever killed the most people with the sword in a certain amount of time was the winner. Women were raped and shot. The Japanese made the husbands watch the rape and then killed them after when they were done with their wives, or I should say, done raping their wives. Many civilians were turned into slaves and forced to work during manual labor during parts of the war. Many were not fed well, many were worked to death. Japanese scientists would experiment on people just like the Nazis did. They would inject people with powerful poisons and other materials and timed of how fast it would take before a person died. What happened to Allied soldiers? So Allied soldiers again are people from like England, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, France. The Japanese did not believe in rules for captured soldiers like the Nazis did. The result of this is that the Japanese were very cruel to Allied soldiers. This is why many Allied troops did not take prisoners of war. Like American soldiers in World War II would not actually take many Japanese survivors. They would just shoot them on sight, which is very cruel. But the reason is because of this treatment here. Allied soldiers were typically put in work camps and made to do slave labor for the Japanese. Many soldiers would die from being overworked in these camps. Japanese soldiers were known for making Allied soldiers dig their own graves and shooting them after the graves were built. Japanese soldiers also were notorious for cutting off American soldiers' heads just for fun, which is going on in this picture right here. Towards the end of the war, Japanese soldiers would eat bodies of Allied soldiers. They would do it not because they're hungry either. They would do it just to scare the other American prisoners that they had, which is terrifying when you think about it. So at the end of the war, the Allies held war crimes for certain Japanese leaders that were involved in the Democide. Most were killed, like they were executed. The sad but ironic part is that the trials for the Allied troops were being mistreated. Not many trials were about the treatment of other Asian peoples. The reason why this happened is because during this time, the Allies were extremely racist and did not really care. I should say care, not can. Care why so many groups of people die by the Japanese. So like the only groups that were really looked into were the Japanese, not anyone else. Today, certain Japanese soldiers that were involved have said sorry to Asian countries that were affected by the war. Japan itself has not issued a formal apology yet, which is a huge deal because usually that happens. Many people in Japan think the other Asian countries made it up to make Japan look bad in front of the Allies. So there's still people in Japan who are like, all this was made up. This is a lie. This is a problem because it's not a lie. People wouldn't make this up. 6 to 10 million people didn't just disappear and die from over 10 years. It didn't happen. So that is the reason why this is important. I hope you enjoyed the video. I shouldn't say really enjoy because it's really sad, but I hope you learned something from this video. Thank you for your time.